And we are back with part 2 with Mr. Steve Lee, the sound effects wrangler, founder of the Hollywood Sound Museum. You can see him here. He is surrounded by Academy Awards.
My two friends, yes.
His two buddies over here. Flanked by the gold. So where did we leave off? We were talking about Ben Burtt's mustache. We were. And then from there we were talking about Mr. Mark Mangini. So who else have you had the privilege to work with?
I've had a couple things actually dub at Skywalker. So I've cut effects that the likes of Gary Rydstrom and Randy Tom have dubbed.
Yeah, Randy Tom is another legend. He just got the Yoda Award.
Oh yeah, he's been there like
is it 40 years now? I think
something like that. Yeah, he's one of the founding fathers of Skywalker Sound. Really, I mean, he came with around the same time as Ben. I mean, Randy.
He worked on Apocalypse Now too, right?
He did.
Yeah.
In fact, in the documentary Making Waves, there's actually some footage. You see Walter and the other guys at the console, and in the back there's this guy with this mustache, sort of leaning in and observing, and it's Randy. He was just there.
He even had the Ben Burt mustache.
That was the Apocalypse Now sound effects collection. That was the first sound effects collection I ever bought.
That's the Zoetrope collection, I think, right?
Yeah.
Amazing stuff there. I mean, that's, Walter Murch is just absolutely brilliant.
People don't talk enough about Walter Murch. I mean,
he's a very unassuming guy. He's a very quiet, and he's all about the work and the technique and the wisdom behind it. That's why the documentary Making Waves is so good, because you actually hear about how he got into it and his early career. He talks quite openly about it. But usually when he talks, it's about the craft specifically and not about him and his whole genesis. So that document, I really recommend it for anyone who's not just in sound, but just filmmaking in general. You learn so much from it.
Yeah, he's not just a sound designer and a sound editor, but he's also just a straight-up editor as well.
Yeah, he's a brilliant picture editor. Yeah, absolutely. Won an Oscar for it.
Did he have a mustache?
Oh, yeah.
I think he still has he has a beard, I think, right?
Yeah, it never left. Yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, cool. We were talking about Disney. And I know that you weren't allowed to tell us everything, but what are some of you've got to have some cameos with your voice in some Disney things.
Well, I mean, we cut sound on a bunch of things. I actually supervised a couple things, Disney sound, some stuff that's over at Disney Seas in Japan. Did an Aladdin attraction there.
Have you been to Disney in Japan? Okay, or any other ones, or just the ones in the States?
No, I just haven't had the chance. But in fact, one of the big things that I did a film for California Adventure that's no longer there. It got replaced by the Little Mermaid ride. But we did this wonderful film. It was the history of California that Whoopi Goldberg narrated. And it was there for several years, but it got taken out during the overhaul of California Adventure. But that was a really fun film. It was sort of the history of California. And it had a lot of fun stuff in it. Got a Wilhelm in. And
of course you did.
I got a couple token Jimmy McDonald saying it was a straight film. It was like a history film, so there wasn't much,
Well, then how did you sneak a Wilhelm in there if it's just a?
There's a scene very early where there's an earthquake.
Someone going off the bridge in Big Sur.
A Native American falls over, and it worked. It was okay.
Well, we got there. As many times as I've been to Disney World, and I don't even know, I've lost count at dozens and dozens and dozens of times, but I don't think I have ever been to Disneyland. If I have, it was once when I was a kid that I just don't remember. But next time I'm in LA, I need to plan an extra day. But I'm only going to go if you're my tour guide.
I used to get calls like that all the time that saying, "Can you do the tour? We'll get your ticket and we'll take you."
Yeah,
in.
I'll pick up your ticket.
I would do that. I've got my whole spiel. I've got the sort of the backstage kind of take on all that stuff, because it's one of my favorite places. And I've been doing this Hollywood Sound Museum, we've been comparing it a lot to Disneyland, because it's like nobody has done a Hollywood Sound Museum before. And back when Walt was getting the ideas for Disneyland together, everyone was saying, nobody's done this before. It's not going to work. You need to do this and this and this. So I've been hitting sort of the same struggles that I heard that Walt had, getting his park financed and built and all that. So we've been using a lot of comparisons to that, and a lot of the quotes that Walt and his guys were quoted as saying at the time were kind of inspirational. There was one great quote from Art Lindquist, who was the president of Disneyland in its early years. He said something to the effect of the best thing they had going for them when they were building Disneyland was ignorance. It meant that they tried stuff having no clue whether it would work or not, but they knew they needed to do. And that's kind of how I feel with a sound museum. You know, you talk to someone about a sound museum, you just sit in a room and listen to stuff. And, well, yeah, that's part of it, but there's so many other things. You know, we're hopefully going to have interactive exhibits and displays of different things. But it's kind of a hard concept to sort of get into people's heads.
Let's think about, the world of sound, specifically when it comes to cinema. I mean, when Rick and I were talking about this yesterday, sound in film is like the birth of Christ. Bear with me a minute. As our calendars are split by that birth, you have before Christ and after Christ. You have in the world of film, before sound and after sound. And sound offered so many opportunities within how you technically do things, but also new careers, not for just the technical side of it, but for actors from the stage. They came
and also careers were ruined.
Yes,
too.
careers were ruined.
We were talking about that.
Didn't have the voice.
Exactly.
I just listened to Mark Maron's podcast, and he was talking to what's his name? The actor that's in one of the Brad Pitt. He's producing a film about the old Western days and about how so many of those actors just lost their jobs because they didn't sound heroic.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's. I mean, we take it for granted now. I mean, it really changed the experience of cinema. But at the same time, just like you said, I mean, this is a huge part that I think is easily forgotten. It ruined careers.
It did. Yeah.
I mean,
but it made many too. So
yes.
It goes both ways. But yeah, absolutely. A lot of those actors just didn't quite know how to deal with it, and they had the wrong voice, and they just sort of faded into obscurity after sound.
Right. It's like one of my favorite movies, Singing in the Rain. I mean,
I
mean, that is such a great moment when she finally says, "I'm going to show them what I really sound like." It's awful.
Yeah.
But it's a fantastic movie. I haven't seen Singing in the Rain.
I know guys who have made their careers out of replacing other actors and coming, if somebody can't come in to loop a line. A lot of big name actors have actors friends that come in to replace their dialogue that are their designated replacement,
like a sound-alike kind of voice.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, walk us through the Hollywood Sound Museum. So, is this going to be in one place? Is this going to be a mobile museum or?
We're still in very much a blue sky phase. Ideally, we are going to have a location somewhere in Hollywood proper. We'll probably start with a pop-up. That's sort of a smaller scale of what we want to do. But ultimately, there'll be a repository of sound that people can sit down at stations and listen to things and learn about the history and see videos and things like that. But we'll also have interactive exhibits where you can learn how to do Foley to picture and, maybe a dialogue replacement thing where you can, record a line to a film. But you'll get to see all these wonderful artifacts and old moviolas and things like that. You'll get to see these guys, maybe have your picture taken with one of them. Because we've got to appeal to the Instagram age also. So we'll have a lot of very visual things for people to come in and play with microphones and things like that. But for the most part, I want it to be this sort of interactive educational experience where you learn more about the process of sound in entertainment, and not just film. I mean, radio and video games and just all the media that's out there.
Well, one of my favorite museums in Nashville is the Johnny Cash Museum. If you've never been, it's fantastic. But particularly because there's this one place in the museum that's interactive where you're at a recording console, a mixing console, and they have Johnny Cash masters there, and you actually mix songs.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's cool.
It's really cool. It's fantastic.
We're hoping to have something like that with films.
Yeah,
have the pre-dubs of a sequence so you can hear just the Foley, just the dialogue, just the sound effects, just the music, and play with the levels.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they had something like that at MGM. They had it was like they had a clip from Star Wars. It was the dogfight scene between the TIE fighters and X-wing fighters, and you could use the the sounds from the film that Ben designed, or they had like Hollywood Western sounds or something that you could do it as a comedy or you could do it as serious. And I remember being fascinated with, wow, changing the music played in the scene made it, go from an action film to something comedic. And yeah, it was very cool.
Ben actually sent me a clip that he did for fun of an old Hopalong Cassidy Western where he replaced all of the guns with Star Wars blasters. And it's hilarious. It is just hilarious. I mean, no visual effects added or anything, just the sound. But it's a riot. It's really funny. Yeah, it's funny how you can just play with the sound and create. I mean, that's one of the things I like to impart to, filmmakers. Sound can really do more than you think it might be able to. Like you can have, we can cover mistakes visually with sound and make it work. There's so many great moments where, I don't know. Let me think of an example. I was on a show not too long ago where they had a master take, and they really liked everybody's performance. But one actor, just for no reason at all, looked out a window or something like that, and just there was no explanation for it, and it was kind of jarring. And the director said to me, I don't know if we can do anything about it. And I said, I'll just cut a car honk or something, or a bird or something outside, and it'll work great. Yeah. And he was skeptical, but I did it, and it covered that moment. It made it work. It made it so that you just ignored it because we're all distracted by things like that all the time. Our cell phones going off, car horns. So it just worked, and I was able to save it.
I think you missed an opportunity there. You should have just threw in a Wilhelm scream.
I think we did joke about it at the time, actually, because there wasn't one in the show. It was this very intense sort of dialogue kind of situation. But yeah, it's sometimes Richard and I joke about, well, how can we get it into this film?
It's funny because when I watch crowd scenes in films, because worked in the industry for so long, I can't watch them the same anymore because I know what is really happening on that set, which is absolute silence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And knowing that just ruins crowd scenes for me. And
sure.
But it's I'm folding that into what you said, how much sound can change something. Because on set, when you're watching, it's like, geez, this is stupid, and everybody's pantomiming, and it's just ridiculous. But then once you put in that sound, it comes alive.
Yeah.
Well, people don't realize that they do that so that they can have the control over the sound, so that they can bring up or raise or lower different elements of the sound because they're all recorded separately, and you have a better control.
Yeah.
It's the same that's why they suddenly had to put things on sound stages. We talk about the silent days. In the silent days, they could shoot anywhere and directors could yell direction to people. But, now that there's sound, we had to be more conscious of it. And we're in these, soundproofed stages and trying to control all the conditions and all that. But still, sound is always the last thing people worry about because they're always with all these special effects and they have to have some kind of practical thing that, people are experiencing, they'll have wind or they'll have, lights or something like that. And this stuff makes sound, and we still end up replacing almost all the dialogue, especially these big effects films.
But it's, and it's not just that dialogue. Like you're doing something in a room on a sound stage. I mean, it's just the dialogue you're recording.
And everything else has to be put in.
Everything else has to be put in, down to the ambient of a light buzzing,
and people don't understand the significance of just a simple background like that, too.
Oh, it's huge.
Sometimes the dialogue isn't recorded as well as it could be, so we'll have to generate an air condition that's in there. I was on one film that I actually walked off. I haven't talked about this much because it was kind of a bitter experience, but he was nitpicking all of my sound design choices, and I really didn't have the patience with him to explain that we really need this noisy background because your dialogue is not that great, and you need it to sort of hide the
bad mic placements,
the bad sound. Yeah. And he just didn't get that. He heard the background. He said, "Oh, that's an awful background. I don't want that in my movie."
Oh, it makes it real. Is what it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I always try to have a different tone on each room that helps the whole. We're all telling a story. Mm-hmm. We're all soldiers in a war to tell the director's story, and everything you can do to motivate to move that story forward is what you have to do. And even something as simple as a background can help tell the story about a location.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, I remember when we were talking with Mark Mangini, where were we? I think we were at the Todd AO stages or something, but he was telling me they were mixing a film, and it was like they only had like a couple of days left to work on it, so they were gunning through it. And there was a scene where somebody set a pen down or something, and they were missing that sound, and so they just grabbed a Zoom recorder and just put it right there on the console desk and dropped the pen just so they could drop that sound in there, because if not, the scene looks or feels dead if there's no sound there.
There's some very subtle things that you have to do that you don't think about, and that kind of stuff. It's like sometimes you're not always aware of the footsteps in a scene, but they have to be there or it'll look weird. You got to have some kind of presence of it. But also, it's a point that you made me think of, Rick. Back in the film days, I was talking about having to pull sounds from the library and transfer them to magnetic film, and then we'd have to get a courier to send them to the stage. Nowadays, if you want to make a change like that, if you realize on the dub stage, oh, I am missing that, we can do it almost instantly. We have our libraries on little drives, and we can cut them in and throw them into the dub like that, whereas it would have been like a day turnaround before. And in a lot of cases, we'll shoot something really quick with the zoom, or even I remember there was one film where there was a light switch that we were missing, and one of the mixers recorded it with his slate mic. He just patched his little cheesy condenser slate microphone that he would use to talk to the machine room. He just patched that in and recorded a little snap, and we put it in. It was fine. It just needed to be something there, and we just flew it in. Okay, disaster averted. Let's move on.
Yeah, there's really no excuse for having poor sound these days.
Yeah.
It really isn't.
Yeah, but you just have to have stuff available. Yeah,
you have to have the foresight to think about it, though, and as much as you can do early on, even before you're filming it, to prepare for that will save you a lot of anguish later.
Well, that brings up a good point. What advice would you give a filmmaker, not necessarily a sound person, but just a filmmaker that's maybe doing it themselves? What are some of the things they should think about?
I can appreciate the fact that some filmmakers don't have the money or the resources to bring in a sound team really, really early, like a post sound team, not just the recordist, the mixer on set. But if you're able to do that and discuss it with whoever is going to be doing it and go over the script with them and talk about the sound points and what they can do and what you want, and it really does help narrow the problems down. And having a really good production mixer who is really keen with the dialogue and will get Wild Traxx on the set of different things that you're going to want later. Just being an awareness, and listening to films and just seeing how it was done before, and trying to minimize some of the traps that we run into, like the ones we've been discussing.
Well, it's funny because especially with student films and even first-time filmmakers, it's the one thing that they did not think about when they're in development or pre-production was sound. Because whenever I watch a student film or I go to like a festival and see a first-time filmmaker, immediately I know, oh, they didn't give a second thought to sound. It was a last thought, because that's what pulls you out every time.
Yep.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, sound adds that third dimension. Without sound, it's kind of like just a two-dimensional, thing that you're watching on a screen. But once you add sound, it's like now you're in that world. You're a part of it. I think part of it is that you're physically feeling the sound waves, touch your body, and
Well, the problem is that what teachers always say and what other filmmakers always say is that film's a visual medium. It's a visual medium. They tell writers that. They tell directors that. It's a visual medium. It's a visual medium. They pound that in their head. But what they fail to remember is even in the silent days, when they showed a film at a theater, there's someone on an organ or a piano. It's not just a visual medium. It's never been just a visual medium.
Even more than that, in some of the bigger cities like L.A. or New York, when they had these big, huge silent film premieres, they would have an orchestra. They would have a sound effects guy in the pit doing percussionist stuff. I mean, I'm working on a book on the history of sound effects right now, and I'm researching all that. And it goes back to like the vaudevillian days where it's just a live performer and you had a musician in the pit doing comic effects.
Absolutely.
And that's like where all of Jimmy McDonald's stuff comes from, where he would make props to represent a sound effect. That it just all harkens back to that sort of thing, and just a performance aspect of it.
It's never been just a visual medium.
Yeah, which is why Foley is so important too, and a lot of people are relying on it more and more. I mean, it's just one part of what we do, but it's a very important part. It's all the sync effects that you can perform to picture. But some editors, like the late great Chuck Campbell, was very into, he knew having these sounds performed to picture created this whole indigenous performance that was only with that film, and sort of made it this little performance piece. And he would always extend the Foley schedule more so that they could do unconventional things that a Foley person wasn't necessarily asked to do, and just add that sort of, like Roger Rabbit is a great example of that. You hear a lot of cartoon effects and things like that, but so many of them were actually performed to picture. John Rush, the great John Rush, did that, and he actually built like different props that he could perform to picture instead of them being cut out of a library. So it has this very genuine kind of sound to it.
Well, that brings up a question I have for you is, have you ever done Foley? Have you ever actually performed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just a little bit, but I leave it mostly to the Foley walkers that have been doing this for years and years. They make it look so deceptively easy. I mean, they're just brilliant with the sync and their performance and all that, and they make it look like almost anyone could. It's really tough.
Well, they're like
exhausting.
a Foley walker or a Foley artist, I guess, they're like musicians, except instead of using an instrument, they're actually using props, and they're making those, literally making them sing sometimes.
Yeah. And doing the footsteps in sync and all that, and of course, we'll take the time to edit their tracks so that it's absolutely perfect, but so much of it is based on their performance and their effort that they put into it. But yeah, they're making props and doing different things. And John Rush is amazing. He's got this little drawer of his little magic tricks when he custom made effects and things like that. Like he's got these little chimes that he made for Tinkerbell in Hook, and he had two different ones. Yeah. He had one for Tinkerbell Happy and one Tinkerbell Angry, which was kind of discordant. And he just made these things and he would perform them to picture. It's just it's just brilliant stuff.
It's amazing. So. I mean, today you can go on YouTube and you can see all kinds of behind the scenes, in a Foley room, Foley artists doing their thing, and it's fun, it's great, and people are totally aware of that. But back in the day, nobody knew what a Foley artist was. How did one become a Foley artist? Were they just a little guy in the totem pole and they said, "Hey,
in the booth"?
That's pretty much how it happened. That's pretty much how it happened. In the documentary Making Waves, they talk a little bit about it. It's named after a guy, Jack Foley, who really pioneered the whole craft, and developed the technique of shooting this stuff in sync, and the name stuck. Let's do that Foley thing. It became synonymous with that particular craft. It's interesting what you say. Foley gets a lot of attention now in the media because it's very visual. You can see the guys performing it in the stage. And, I'm sure you get this too, Rick. It's, if I had a nickel for everybody who, when they ask me what I do, I say I'm a sound effects guy. And they say, "Oh, you do Foley."
Yep.
Because that is their perception of what we do, because they've seen it on the news and in media, and they think that that's the end all to our craft. That's how all sound effects. I had an assistant who believed that too and contacted John Rush first out of the box. But people assume that that's how it's all done, and it sort of romanticizes our thing. There's a guy who's got his bin of tricks, and did they ever consider how do you do an airplane pass by or that sort of thing? I guess they assumed that those were just recorded on the set, which is ultimately our goal. You see a movie and we want you to believe that it was just all there when we
absolutely
when they shot the movie.
Yeah, I didn't really do a whole lot of Foley. I'm trying to think, maybe a half dozen. Most of them were for like short films. There's only one feature that we actually did Foley on that I can think of. But I mean, It was a lot of fun, but mainly my gig was pretty easy. I just go find sound and point the microphone at it. But Foley artists, they're artists. They're called artists for a reason, and it's because
it's the performance aspect of it. It's syncing them up to picture. That's the tough thing. I mean, people can record sound effects on a stage without picture, and some people call that Foley, and it's not. It's really the art of doing the
performing,
in sync sound effects.
Yeah.
And there are people who are marketing, Foley libraries, which isn't really correct because those aren't performed. It's the indigenous performance of Foley that just makes it just a wonderful craft.
Well, it was a black art. Now that everybody sees behind the scenes and all this stuff, that the curtain's been pulled. You see the wizard, and it's like, oh, that's not magic. It's just hard work.
If it's done well, you won't notice it.
Yeah.
There are a couple times where it's like I can tell that a scene has been Foley. There's one moment that I tell when I lecture. I lecture on the college level occasionally and talk about sound effects, and I give them certain examples. And one of them is in the original Poltergeist, 1982 or whatever it was. There's the sequence where she's at the breakfast table with the kid, and they keep moving the objects around in the kitchen.
The chairs were sliding.
She goes, the chairs. Yeah, that's the gag I'm talking about. She goes away for a moment and moves some stuff, like she gets a thing of cleaner or something out from under the sink and closes it and goes back, and the chairs are all stacked.
Right.
They had to Foley that sequence of her muddling around in the kitchen when the camera's off the chairs, because the crew comes in, pulls all the chairs are glued together, so they pull them off and put them on in this position, and they made a racket. So all the sound had to be taken out of that scene, and they had to Foley that whole scene with the quiet, intimate things of her moving. I can hear, in my professional ear, I can hear a difference in tone and miking and everything in the movement sounds that suddenly, the atmosphere just cuts off from the scene as it was, and we're in this little Foley world, and then she comes back and we're back to production sound. I can notice little things like that, but if we do them really, really well, you won't notice. And also the story, if you're engaged in the story and you're involved and you believe in these characters, you don't think about it.
That brings me to it's a good segue, and that is to overdubbing, to ADR.
Oh, yeah.
And what drives me crazy the most, and when I'm watching a movie, is when a scene has been obviously ADR'd. How do you prevent that?
Or one line out of a whole stretch of things. There's another example in Raiders where Sala is talking to Indy about the idol, and there's one line. I think Spielberg wanted to change the inflection or the reading or something, and there's one line, and I'll never forget this. My mom, who passed away a year and a half ago, but she barely understood what I did. So when she noticed something that was wrong, I knew that it must be really wrong for her to catch it. But there was a line in Raiders where Sala, they're talking about the markings on the medallion.
Right.
And they're talking back and forth, and it's all production sound. And then Indy says, "Who can tell us about these markings?" And Sala says, "Perhaps a man I know can help us." That one line was replaced a couple different times. And it's the expression I use. It's ADR from Mars. I mean, it sounds like a completely different mic, and he even sounds younger in the take. And sometimes that can just, whoa, what happened there? It just brings you out of it.
Well, there's a film, Jaws. It's my favorite film.
Our favorite film. Yes,
I've heard of it.
There's a scene, when Hooper's at the coroner's office. He's going over the body and everything, and then it cuts to him lifting the chewed up arm, and the line is,
"This is what happens."
This is what happens.
Yep,
and it's totally out of everything. I mean, it's like not even recorded in the same room. It's just
even great films have these same problems. It happens.
I never understood that, and I'm not one to point out somebody else's you didn't do a good job at sound, because everybody, I respect everybody's work.
You never
sometimes
know
it's how did that slide? Why didn't you just push the mic back a little bit further? Why is he right on top of the mic? Or I just never understood that.
I talked to the dialogue guys on Raiders. I mean, obviously, I'm friends with the guys who did it. Kurt Schulke was one of the dialogue supervisors on it and supervised the ADR, and he told me this. I don't remember all of it now. It'll be in my book. I think I wrote it down. But Spielberg wanted to change the reading, and they hadn't shot it before, so they just put it in. But obviously he likes to use as much production as he possibly can. So if there's one line that needs to be tweaked,
So how do you go about? I mean, I have my idea of how you would go about preventing that pull out with a blatant ADR thing.
There, a lot of times, if you have a really good dialogue mixer, I mean, nowadays you usually have like one guy mixing the film, but back in the old days, we had the luxury of having 3 mixers on the dub stage: a dialogue, effects, and music guy. Mm-hmm. And there were some brilliant dialogue mixers that were geniuses at matching ADR. That's what we would call it. Terry Porter at Disney, he's now retired, but he did all the Disney films, which are recorded dry on a stage, just a dialogue stage, all that dialogue for animation. There's nothing on it. And he, like in Beauty and the Beast, when Belle walks into the castle and you hear her voice being reverberated, that's Terry. Mm-hmm. Just choosing the spaces and all that, and matching all these lines and creating this whole atmosphere with the dialogue, which is something you don't think about. How can dialogue create a space or a part of the story? Just hearing the space it's in can do that.
Absolutely.
But also matching all the different sources. Star Wars is a great example. All the 3 leads were looped on different stages. And if you listen to some of the sequences, especially the newer versions, because they went back to the original production dialogue in some cases, and they ended up remixing it. And I don't think it was done they spent a lot of time on that original dub for Star Wars, matching all that dialogue. And when they redid it, it was lost, some of the original mixing. But they really took the time. Now you listen to it, like the scene where they're in where they just sprung the princess and they're in the hallway and they're being shot at. Mm-hmm. You can really hear a textural difference in each of the 3 leads. It's like Mark is really clean, Harrison is really muddy, and Carrie sounds like she was recorded like on a music stage. She sounds perfect. But it really, sometimes it takes a professional ear. And again, I say, if you're into the story, because I didn't notice any of this very early on when I'm seeing it for the first time, I'm just sucked into it. But later on, when I start learning about the craft, I start noticing these, the little imperfections. I've often said that you can learn more from a film's mistakes from a bad film than you can from a really, really good film, because you start seeing the seams and learning, oh, well, they must have done this or they could have done that. And yeah.
One of my favorite action series is Lethal Weapon. I love the Lethal Weapon series, and I heard a rumor, and I have no idea if this is true, but I heard that Lethal Weapon 2, almost all of the dialogue was replaced.
Oh, go spit, Rick.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Now, I've heard 100%. I didn't buy that, but I heard that all of the dialogue do you know anything about that?
I don't know. I haven't heard it in a long time. I'd have to listen. I could probably tell you just by listening.
I do know this. I do know that they missed a gunshot. There's a scene on the House on Stilts, and
that's the first one.
No, it is not. It is not.
Oh no,
it's with the guy from South Africa.
That's right.
There are so many stories of things like that happen.
And he pulls it was Murtaugh pulls the trigger, and you can actually see the blank go off. You see a spark, but there's no sound. Yeah,
it happens.
Let's go back and fix that, and let's do that this afternoon.
Well, it's a long, arduous process, and so,
Not anymore. Now it's just clicking and dragging.
There are lots of reasons that things like that happen. I mean, I had a few of them. Richard Anderson told me some amazing ones on Star Trek The Motion Picture. They were waiting on opticals that they never got, so they would have to trust the picture department to tell them, okay, well, the photon torpedo fires at this footage, and then it fades out here, and they would have to sort of guess where the sync mark was, because they didn't have any picture whatsoever. So there were a lot in that initial Star Trek release. They've redone it. There was a different version on DVD where they fixed a lot of these. But yeah, that initial release, they rushed through it, and they never got to see these opticals until the film was done.
Wow.
Happened to me on a Goofy movie. There was a shot in a Goofy movie where very late in the game, it was like we were dubbing, I think, and there was this exterior shot of a restaurant or a cafe out, on while they're having the road trip, and there's a scene in the cafe, and then they leave. It's the beginning of a montage, and the car is driving off. An animated film, and the picture editor says, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, we're animating in a neon light flashing on and off on that last shot." And I said, "Well, I don't see it." And he says, "Yeah, it's going to be a little late because they're still working on it." And I'll cut in a sound if you swear it's going to be there. Just give me the footage of where it goes on and off. And he did. and we cut it. And yes, it's not in the film. you hear nick, nick. And I had the guy pull it way down, just in case, because I kept having this gut feeling that it's not going to get in.
Sure.
It's not going to get in time visually. Never got in, but you can hear it.
Now, you worked on... Oh, go ahead.
No, this stuff happens all the time is what I'm saying. It's who knows why this, could have happened.
I want to know. I want to know.
Answers, Steve.
Oh, all right then. I'll get on that. Like the Ben Burt thing, the stash.
The mustache thing. Yes.
Now, you worked on Over the Hedge, which, by the way, is I think it's the only animated movie I saw in the theater where I actually bursted out laughing when I was in tears.
Oh, yeah, I cried.
Especially at the end where he takes the can of energy drink and then the whole world slows down.
Yeah.
Dude, I was crying in the
squirrel
theater.
Or whatever. Oh,
yeah, was it Hammy the squirrel, I think?
Yes. Oh,
I like the cookie.
Funny.
It was Steve Carell. Steve Carell voiced him. So what were some of the effects that you worked on for that?
Oh, there's some fun stuff. I remember one very fun session with Ken Johnson, the great Ken Johnson, effects recordist extraordinaire. Ken's amazing. I talk about him in my book, too. He's a really good guy. But there was one really crazy session where we had a laundry list of things from Richard Anderson, who supervised the film, of things to record. And one of them was potato chips falling. Okay, that's something new. I don't have that in my library.
Now, is that during the slow motion scene where they're falling?
I don't remember. I have to see that film again. It's been a long time. I need to find that again. But Ken and I bought a bunch of bags of potato chips, and very artfully, and there's actually a picture on my Facebook profile of this, which you can cut to now if you want, if I provide it for you, of these. I took a big handful of potato chips, and we had like a velvet. We covered a board with like felt so that they could hit this and sort of bounce off each other, because if they just drop, they don't make any sound. So we had this sort of thing that they could sort of roll and crescendo off of to record the sound of potato chips falling. And I don't remember what the gag was. I know there was a lot of junk food in the film because the bear would raid the junk food machine and stuff like that. So we did a lot of different stuff like that. I just remember that as being a really fun film. And I snuck a Wilhelm in for the bug zapper. That was fun.
Oh, that's sped up though, right? It's a high pitch version, isn't it?
I don't know if they used it, but I made it and I cut it in there as there's a bug getting zapped, and all the animals are sentient and have feelings and reactions. So I figure, okay, well, the insect should scream. So
very funny movie.
That's a great film.
One of my favorites.
Yeah.
Steve, let me ask you. So, I mean, obviously in the film world, doing sound design, sound editing, and all that. But you've also done video games.
I've done a few.
What's the difference between working on a film and working on a video game?
Well, let me preface this by saying I did video games like in the early 2000s.
Okay.
And they could be from another planet now.
Right.
I mean, the technology moves so quickly. I mean, now you're into these virtual spaces and reality is just, it looks so real, and it's like a film. These cinematics that they literally cut sound to like a feature film is completely different from the stuff that we used to do. But we would make various sound files for each of these events. We'd get a list of events and have 5 or 6 different versions of that event and provide them to the people that would put them into the game, and they'd see if they work, and we'd go that way. And then there'd be sort of a general background. But now it's gotten so out of control with all these people, with headphones on and hearing the sound in perspective for their character, as opposed to everybody else who is like if I fire a gun at someone, I hear the gun going off, but they hear the bullet coming toward them and whizzing by them. It's just insane how they coordinate all these elements. It's just, I can't keep up. It's like me dealing with, metadata on sound effects. It's, well, hell, I cut sound on film. Where does this go again? It's in the sound file? You mean it's in, why don't I hear it? It's part of the, okay, fine. It's just, the technology part of it goes so fast that I just sort of trust the tech guys and the IT guys to sort of help me along with that. But yeah, it was a much different process there. I worked on a Superman video game, and that was a thrill because I got to. I wasn't asked, but I went and tracked down like Superman in Flight and, all the classic stuff and sort of snuck in little homages to Superman flying from the old TV shows.
Now, this is the one from the 40s, right? The
50s,
40s?
dude.
Or 50s, sorry.
The George Reeves.
That's the sound right there.
It's like a wind machine and a couple of other things. It's really awful.
Yeah.
But I
didn't think it was awful as a kid, though. As a kid, I was like, oh my gosh, of course that's what Superman sounds like when he flies.
Steve Flick talks about that all the time. He calls it the Shane effect. When you hear Shane's rifle firing for the first time, it's like this bigger, larger than life thing. But now you hear it and it doesn't quite work. You try to, back then it was the biggest gun you ever heard. And now we're making stuff, 1,000 times bigger than that. But it's the impression it made. Like the tornado in Wizard of Oz. That was a note from Spielberg when they did Poltergeist. Said, I want it to sound like the tornado in Wizard of Oz. And we listened to it and that doesn't sound good at all. It's again, being invested in the emotions of the film and accepting it and, falling in love with those characters and going along for the ride covers a lot of, production mistakes and things like that. It's just when you buy it and you're enjoying it, nothing else matters.
Well, there's a reason why Shane's gun was that loud. Because he's supposed to be bigger than life.
Yeah.
He's supposed to be.
Well, that's
kind of its purpose.
In the context of that film and everything, it works perfectly.
Right.
And it's the biggest sound. On Star Wars, they had problems when they would, the blasters made sounds as big as the spaceships exploding. And so they'd have to when they blew up Alderaan in the Death Star. Oh, I'm sorry, spoiler.
Oh, what?
Oh my gosh!
I'm sorry.
Ruin all the good movies.
When they blow up Alderaan, there is very purposely a very quiet dialogue scene just ahead of it, so that everything comes back down, and then they blow up the planet in this big huge thing because the blaster battles were just as loud.
Yeah.
That's one of the oldest tricks is right before an explosion, you would drop everything down to make the explosion sound bigger. And then, of course, I think it was Attack of the Clones when Ben was designing, what it was called, I don't know the proper name of it, like the Sonic Blast from Jango Fett's. Yeah. I mean, that's like a perfect example. As you see the explosion and you're waiting for it, and then, bow, you hear this great kind of really cool
He had
sound.
been talking about that for a while. He had been talking about trying to
But he won't tell everybody how he did it, right?
No, he's keeping that one under wraps, yeah. It's that big twang or whatever it is.
He doesn't want somebody pulling it and throwing it in every movie. That's why.
Yeah, Steve. What you started.
That brings up another discussion. People talk about signature sounds and all that. And, they talk about, can you copyright a sound? Like, Wilhelm, why isn't it copyrighted and all that? Well, it's hard to copyright sounds. But just sort of this general sort of rule, this unspoken rule that we have, you wouldn't in your right mind use the sound of R2-D2 for any other robot. You'd be laughed out of the dub stage, the lightsabers, the Star Trek sounds, all these really signature sounds that are so ingrained on it. You would be an idiot to use it again if you weren't in that franchise or you were doing a parody or a joke or something like that, you could get away with it. But if you were doing a new genuine science fiction film, you got to start from scratch,
Absolutely.
And that's the sort of spoken rule about this sort of thing. Sounds are copyrighted as part of that film. The final soundtrack and the dub as it's delivered, that is part and parcel owned by the studio now. But the elements, we keep them and we reuse them every now and then because, it's just part of our thing. It's what we do. It's our palette. And door closes and guns and cars and things like that. Yeah, we get away with them all the time. People talk about Wilhelm being the most used or overused sound effect. There are some guns, ricochets, and doors and things like that.
How about the great red-tailed hawk screech for every bird that ever.
That's the Hollywood Edge collection.
You know
think,
what?
Right?
That's a gray area because there's so many different versions of it. Because that's what that bird sounds like. People always say that it's the same sound, but that's what they sound like. And people think it's a stock sound effect. No, they have a one-note performance. That's what they do. There are better recordings of it than others. Mm-hmm. There was an owl hoot, a little owl, hoo, hoo. It was this really old one from the 40s.
Yeah, it was real heavy bottom to it, right?
Yes. I remember when we first saw Beauty and the Beast, the rough cut of the animated Beauty and the Beast in '91. They had used it it was on a storyboard of Maurice going to the castle, it's when he's lost in the woods. And there was a shot of an owl and they used that old stocky Halloween record owl hoot. And they fell in love with it and they kept it in. We kept saying, "Oh, we're gonna replace that guy. Oh no, we can't have that. Can't do it." We waited too long, or they said, "No, don't do it." But it got track read by the animators. Track reading is when you take the dialogue and you write it out phonetically as a guide to the animators so they can animate each syllable. Mm-hmm. The goddamn owl got track read, and his little movement of his body is animated perfectly to this old stocky sound that there was no way we could have taken it out.
Yeah. He does the whole.
Yeah. If you watch it again, it's out there on Disney Plus. You watch that moment, that little owl. He is performing to that sound effect that was recorded, before any of us were born. It's pretty funny.
My favorite sound effect that I think is ridiculous is every time there's a snake on screen, it's a rattlesnake. No matter what kind of snake it is.
That is true.
Yeah, it happens a lot in the Indiana Jones, the second Indiana Jones.
Yes.
He does that because it's like, I'll tell you a story. There was a film we did, a Jean-Claude Van Damme film called Hard Target.
Oh yeah, I love it.
I got to jump in here real quick. I had a friend that I went to school with who grew up, I think it was Belgium, where Jean-Claude Van Damme was from.
Yep.
But he grew up with him, and they were in a gang together. And it's a true story. And apparently, Jean-Claude Van Damme was the runt. Like, he was like the little kid that they would all pick on.
He's a little guy.
Yeah, but I'll let you continue. But yeah,
That's
and then
funny.
he ended up becoming a dancer from there, and they kind of made fun of him, and then he became this huge action star.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then the joke was on them. But
Right.
Yeah. Well, there was a moment in the film where the villain is walking through this woody area or something like that, and a snake comes down and tries to attack him, and to just show this villain's dominance, he grabs it and strangles it and kills the snake in front of his.
I love it.
To show how tough he is.
Yeah.
And I remember there was this note that we need a snake vocal for this snake, and John P. got assigned that. And I'll never forget, he had made something on his 8-track. He had, we're working analog, and he had an 8-track recorder, an Atari 8-track, and he had assembled his elements, and he was going to lay them down to another 1/4-inch machine for the library. And he would always slate his stuff very perfectly. I loved him for that. He would always put all this information in the slate that I would put into the library. But I was walking by right as he was getting ready to slate this, and I hear, okay, this is going to be slimy snake vocal, take one. And I couldn't resist. I stuck my head in the door and snake, yes, yes, oh yes. And he fell out of his chair laughing. Get in here. Let's lay that down. And we did a gag version of the sound. Hiss, oh hiss, hiss. And I did it to picture too. And George Simpson, bless his heart, the late great George Simpson, cut it in as a gag, and they had it on the stage. And I wasn't there. I don't know what kind of reaction it got, but I did it to picture. And when the villain grabs the snake, I did the. Oh, hiss. So hey, watch it! Ow! My back!
These would make great ringtones. I want to get a ringtone of that on my phone for you.
Yes,
anytime you text me.
Yeah,
Slimy
but it was
snake.
so funny. We just laughed. We had so much fun. We used to sort of informally play this game to see how many times we could get fired on a show by doing stuff like that.
Snake.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Well, we still got a little bit of time, but I want to kind of switch gears here and go back to the Hollywood Sound Museum. I want to, before I forget, I definitely want to make a call to the audience, and maybe this will help you out. But if you've worked on anything that would be recognizable, like a prop or something that you could donate to the Hollywood Sound Museum, how would they get a hold of you?
HollywoodSoundMuseum.org will have all the information. They can also search for it on Facebook. There's a big Facebook page. We're actually starting a fundraiser on the 27th, I think, Monday, the 27th of January. This is 2020, everyone, for all the people watching this years later, hopefully.
You guys from the future.
Yeah. Ooh, coming to you from the past. We're starting a fundraiser this Monday to help with storage costs and things like that and our development stuff. we're getting a bunch of really nice grants and things like that we're working on right now. But just sort of in the meantime, while we're still developing things, we need a little bit of help. So we're starting a fundraiser on Kickstarter. And so many great people like Gary Rydstrom and Richard Anderson and Mark Mangini have shot little videos that we're going to use on the Kickstarter. So that'll be a lot of fun. And we'll be sharing, as premiums for donations, we'll be sharing like interviews with people and little CDs of things. So it's worth giving us a few bucks because you'll get some of this history and you'll get to follow the development of the museum. And it's just we want it to be this fun place to share the craft of film sound and just entertainment audio. But yeah, we're working away. We're sort of in the development phase, and we're accepting all kinds of different things. I mean, the word has gotten out enough. I've been developing this for a couple of years now, and so word has gotten out that people are like, hey, I've got this old, book, this old equipment book from, one of the old, Magnatechs that we used, or, we've got an old Fairlight, would you like to have that? Or,
do you have a Synclavier?
I'm working on it.
I might know somebody that has several. They might be able to donate one.
Well, I've actually gotten a call from the relative of a sound designer. I don't want to use any names right now, but I don't want to jinx it. But we're hoping to get a very special one soon. But I mean, ideally, I want one of everything. It would be great to have this stuff on display, and so you could see how it was used. And even if it doesn't work anymore, just as a display piece, it's wonderful. Obviously, I would love to have a wonderful transfer room where we could have one of everything and go from any medium to any other medium.
Sure.
But just the fact that you can see what we used is great. So
what kind of other things would you like people to donate? And also, what about people that work in the video game industry? Are you looking for props?
Yeah, I'm
things like that
looking
as
for
well?
that sort of thing. We're gonna have to deal with legal clearances and things like that because we want to be able to show clips of things and before and afters of different things. And so there's going to be a lot of coordination on that. We've already started the process and started reaching out to the studios because fortunately it's in their best interest to advertise their product. So, if we get them at the early stages, which wonderfully we're finding out, when we're negotiating all this stuff to promote their films, they're actually in their final dubs, and all those materials, all the sound materials are right there because they're just finishing the sound to time it so that the campaign is ready. So you sometimes have access to that raw material, which is perfect timing, and it works out really great. So we're sort of finalizing those deals and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear what people have. I mean, people have these old recordings of things and, old record collections and just old equipment. There was an old guard sound guy who was in town last year, and actually the one this year is coming up. I met him at the Dolby Oscar party, and I was talking to him about the museum concept, and his wife, who had gone off to get us a drink and came back. As I'm explaining this to him, his wife hit him on the shoulder and said, "Give him those goddamn microphones he's got in the garage."
Yeah.
That kind of stuff is, we dig it.
Yeah, there's plenty of wives out there that want their husbands to get rid of their crap.
Get in the garage and get that stuff out of here.
It doesn't even have to be working, because I would love to have an artist, make some like 3D sculptures of some of these things. Like I said, for the Instagram crowd to have a wonderful sort of display of things. I would love to have it's in my proposal for the thing to have some, wonderful art that people can come in and have a picture taken with all these microphones facing you and all that.
Yeah.
So we've got all kinds of different, ideas and things. And I actually cut, for a presentation I did on the museum almost 2 years ago, actually, I cut a really long montage of film sounds as sort of this enveloping experience. When you walk in, you hear all these classic sounds go off from all these different films that we all recognize. So we'll have interactive things like that and listening experiences and things like that. And anyone who wants to contribute things or has an idea, we're at that early phase where it's really open. Hopefully before the end of the year, we'll have a pop-up where you can see some of this stuff in its early stage. And then hopefully we'll have a permanent location if we can get decent amount of funding to make this happen for everyone.
Not if, but when you get.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Thank you.
Be a doobie.
Yeah.
And I'm talking to a certain sound effects guru about maybe releasing some of the museum stuff on CD. We'll have to discuss that later.
He sounds like a really attractive guy.
Yeah, but he smells bad.
Who knows what he's doing?
Well, first, I think the Hollywood Sound Museum is a great idea for anybody who is a fan of film and a history buff on film. This is something you can get behind. Not only if you worked in the industry, in the sound industry, items that you could donate, but just as a fan, something that you could donate funds to at this early stage to really help it get off the ground. Because this is a huge part of cinema.
Absolutely,
huge part. And so if anybody's out there, if you're a fan of cinema, check out HollywoodSoundMuseum.org. Look for the Kickstarter. Donate some money. Yeah, don't just talk about sound effects. Don't go to the forums on Facebook and be a part of it. Actually, get involved with it. Send money if you can, or if you've got props or sounds or anything cool that you can contribute. I'm going to go through our prop room and give you guys anything we can that's been used in films and things that might be recognizable. But we got a big box of shard glass. You want that?
That's it. It's very, very shardy.
Sure.
Well, Steve, I know you got to get going because we're getting to the top of the hour, but I got to ask this before we cut out. Can we have you back on the show again? Because I'm sure we could do this for hours and hours. You got great stories.
I'm going to have a podcast for the museum, but I will talk about this to you guys again. Anyone who is interested. I mean, that's the whole genesis for this museum thing, was to get this stuff out of my head and share it with everyone and share the craft and get the knowledge going. So anytime you want to talk about it, I'm there for you, man.
Well, there you go. Well, that's our show today. Thanks again, Mr. Steve Lee, the sound effects wrangler and founder of the Hollywood Sound Museum. Looking forward to having you back on the show. So we will catch you next time. Until then,
thank you, dude.
Make some noise. Yes. See you, brother.
Thank you.